Ladies and gentlemen, I am humbled and honored to have an amazing guest today. And if you guys know me, you guys know I'm all about giving access to learning and knowledge and opportunities. And I love bringing in guests from all walks of life, from Fortune 500 CEOs to politicians to CEOs to people that are doing the work in the community. And I love doing that because it helps us share the wisdom, share the knowledge, and share the leadership. And today's guest is that individual that I am just excited to talk about. He is a fellow Marine. He is a World War II and a Korea War veteran. And he's 100 years young. And he's a Montford Marine. And he's the former ambassador to Grenada. And we have an amazing opportunity today to pick someone's brain today. And if you have kids, please make sure that they listen to this because they are going to want to get their notebooks out. So I want to give us a warm welcome here to former Ambassador Ted Britton Jr. Sir, welcome to TVC.
One quick little note. It's the only title in federal government, the civilian, that's permanent. It doesn't have a term limit. So it's a rank in diplomacy and not actually the job. The job is chief of mission or U.S. representative with the rank of ambassador. So it's permanent, yeah.
Thank you. No, thank you. And you are an ambassador, sir. Not only an ambassador of the service and ambassador of your family, but also an ambassador of God.
The other one is Marine. There's no former Marines. Either
That's right.
You are a Marine or you're not.
That's right. Semper Fi, sir. Yeah. So, sir, I'd like to orient the audience a bit. We usually talk about your background and first. So take us back a little bit about this gentleman, Theodore Britton Jr., that grew up in North Carolina and then moved to New York City. What was that like?
South Carolina.
Excuse me, South Carolina.
Yeah.
And
I was born in North Augusta, South Carolina. Spent my first 10 years there, and then went to New York, and I was up there for 8 years, and then bingo, back to North Carolina, and there for about a little bit less than a year because I went to the Marine Corps for the camp where we were trained. It was called Montford Point, a new amphibian landmass that had been purchased to train Marines in amphibian landings, which was good because it came up just as World War II was beginning to break out. Yeah. But anyway, from that, was back to New York after 2 years, 4 months, and 16 days, and then back in New York. Yeah.
So what was that like? Was it how was your childhood? Did you what was your what are some of your memorable moments?
Well, that was real rustic. It was a one-room schoolhouse with 4 rooms and 4 rows. And as you got promoted, you simply moved to 1 row over each time. My teacher was there was one teacher. When I finished the 4th grade, my sister and I had to go to another school, and we walked about 2 miles in the morning. We would always have 2 slices of light bread, and we'd buy a tray of peanut butter for a couple of pennies or so, and then we'd have a jar of sweetened water. That was lunch. And when I came to New York, they said you kids from the South weren't as smart as those from up north, so they put me back 3 years. Then a lucky thing happened. My father lost his job, and I had to move downtown from Harlem into the white section, and they had an entirely different opinion. So back up I went. They promoted me back up. And then in high school, a man by the name of L. Walter Stevens, he was a doctorate in Phi Beta Kappa. From day one, Jeff, he said, "Britton, I want you to be a gentleman and a scholar." And for the next 3.5 years before I went in the Marine Corps, he would always say, "Britton, I want you to be a gentleman and a scholar." He never told me what the job would pay or where I'd go to apply for it or anything like that. In fact, I don't even think I asked him what is a gentleman and a scholar. But Well, when I went in the Corps, for some reason, they always treated me nicely. They didn't mistreat me or abuse me or yell at me or anything like that. I spoke nicely to my drill instructors, and they spoke nicely to me. And that's how I
So
got started. Yeah.
So let's just dive in a little bit about that because I want people to understand how important it is to have a mentor or somebody that believed in you, Ambassador Britton. The fact that he's like, you're going to be a gentleman and a scholar, Theodore, and you're
Well,
like,
Jeff, it was such a blessing because my parents only went to second and third grade. They came out of the country, and they had no schools out there. They only had the church, and the church had a volunteer teacher that taught them. My father could hardly read and write. My mother, I think she could read a little bit and write a little bit, but he always seemed to struggle. But this man, Mr. Stevens, became he was a real mentor to me, a surrogate father. And even in the middle schools downtown, I remember all of my teachers were white, and they were ladies, but one would always say to the class, "Hold on, class, give Theodore another minute or so to catch up." And she would allow me to catch up. And then in the other one, the teacher would say, "Britton, if you get any money, buy yourself some AT&T stock." And finally she said, "Britton, when you go to high school, don't take a commercial course, take a general course because you might be able to go to college and you'll be prepared for it." And the GI Bill came along, and I took advantage of it going to New York University. So I was just so fortunate that I was blessed with these people who looked after me and was willing to share information that I would not have gotten otherwise. Yeah.
and that is such an important thing for people because we have to look at it as an investment into the future, not only
Yes.
of the workforce but of the community, and building up leaders. As
Yes.
I always like to say, leaders that can pass it on here. Now,
Yes.
I know you said at NYU. This was after the Marine Corps, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So let us back up a little bit. So
Yes.
you said you went into the Marine Corps, Ambassador, and please, I think this is a historical moment because, you were part of the Montford Marines, correct?
Yes.
Uh,
Yes. Yes. The camp was called Montford Point. It was a new camp set up by the Marine Corps in that huge piece of land that had been purchased as an amphibious training site. General Lejeune died. They had to name the camp something, so they gave the overall camp the name Camp Lejeune. But that was after we had gone in as a separate camp, only to train African Americans, and it was called Montford Point. And it lasted until about 1949. But you know what? In a sense, this was a new Marine Corps because for 150 years before that, the Marine Corps excluded us after the Union was formed. Southerners controlled the Union and the legislature, and so since most of the black folks were slaves, they made it sure that none came in the Marine Corps. But black folks had fought in the Revolution. But anyway, from that point on, we set up this new camp. Some call it segregated. I call it just separate. Because, before the first African American stepped foot in the camp, there were 23 officers and 90 enlisted men who had volunteered to train us. And they taught us howitzers, mortars, cannons, bayonets, judo, jujitsu, close order drill, and all that business. This was as members of the 51st Defense Battalion at the same time that we were going through boot camp.
wow.
So I don't know
Wow.
Marines who
Wow.
did both at the same time, where
Wow.
you learned close order drill in the morning and how to fire cannons in the afternoon, or howitzers, or mortars, or how to use bayonets and so forth. So we were well off. We got good training. In fact, I counted. We got 45 hours of training which is more than at Paris Island or at San Diego. Yeah.
Now, was this training because World War II was happening at the
Yes.
same time, and
Yes.
so this was a way
Yes.
to get you guys up to speed
Well,
on
yes.
training tactics?
Originally, they were just going to take in 1,000 of us and train us in this defense battalion. But the war lasted on. Ultimately, a total of 19,268 of us came up there for training. But it was a new Marine Corps. The old Corps was gradually wiped out, which was all white. And from that point on, every camp, every Marine Corps installation looked like Montford Point. Yeah.
And I want to thank you for that, sir, because you and what the Montford Marines have done, and just reading the history, is you have produced the finest gentlemen that we have seen.
Yeah.
And in fact, I would say I would owe a lot of your guys' leadership and your initiative and what you guys did. Now the Marine Corps has its first 4-star general,
Michael Langley.
Michael Langley, who's the commander at Africa.
I met him, by the way. One thing I wanted to tell you is, if the kids ever do any reading, there's a book called You'll Be Sorry. You'll Be Sorry, SORREE. And it's about a young man who joined the Marine Corps one day after Pearl Harbor, and he ultimately was one of the first ones to go into Guadalcanal. And interestingly, it was expected that Guadalcanal would be maybe in four weeks. It lasted 4 months, but the men's sea bags and all were on a ship, and that ship was sunk, so they had no clothes. And after a while, they began to run out of food and what have you. They had to eat coconuts and what have you. Now, these are all white, by the way, in Guadalcanal. But having said that, later on, the Marine Corps decided to put black men into what they call depot companies and ammunition companies. So when these black Marines began to show up with food, clothes, ammunition, water, and everything, and for men who were starving, this was a blessing. That's why they loved us over there on the front. Not only that, many of our guys had fired expert on the rifle range. And so to tell the guys, well, I'll take your place and you can take a rest or something like that, was a real, oh gosh, they called us Black Angels. But I even forgot about the stretchers, the fact that there were men who had been wounded on the firing line and couldn't get back to the little mobile medical units. And so we started bringing the guys back from the firing line and also taking their place on the firing line. So the ones overseas got to know black Marines better than those back at home.
You know, Ambassador, you hit on something very important here. And I always tell folks, and that's something I carry with me into the business world, or whether I'm in a relationship, or, I'm looking for my next wife, hopefully not to be my next ex-wife.
Yeah.
I always say, if that person and I can be in a foxhole together and we get along, and I know that they're going to watch my six, that is a friend for life. And you and that period of history, you guys had to get real close, real tight, because you were both in live fire combat, people you were in foxholes with. And what better way to area out divisions and have unification, where both of you can know that it's life or death. And I always say that if that's somebody I want to be in a foxhole with, that is somebody that I can potentially be in a relationship with or do business with. And I think that's a great example.
We had some wonderful people teaching us. And in fact, Colonel Samuel A. Woods Jr., who was our colonel, will receive the Congressional Gold Medal from me personally at the next convention next month of the Montford Point Marines, because he was he was really benevolent. The men worshipped him and thought so much of him. His grandchildren will be there to receive the medal for him. He died in 1968, and he almost had a nervous breakdown because he was severely mistreated. I have a letter from him to the commandant in which he complained that he was humiliated. He and his family were both humiliated and insulted for the job he was doing over at Montford Point here.
And for the audience here, Ambassador, what day and time so people can support your event next month? Do you have a date yet?
It's going to be July 25th at 9 o'clock in the morning at the Hilton Hotel here in Atlanta, and
Okay.
it's open to the public. Yeah, but
Okay,
it's
we
called
will.
the Montford Point Marines, and it'll be I think it's a total of about 15 medals that will be given out. But Colonel Woods is the outstanding one. I will be doing a special tribute to him. Yeah,
And
because
yeah, I will be sure to share that information after this recording. So you you know served the country in World War II. You came back for a little bit. I was reading. You came back. You're like, all right, I'm gonna go to college, and then you went to college for a little bit, and then you went back to Korea. Is that true?
I didn't go up to Korea. Here's what happened. Let me tell you one thing. Being in Guadalcanal was something new to me. First, it was the first time I'm out of the country. And this was new in the sense that I'm on the Solomon Islands. I had a lot to read about it, a lot of history there. But also there was a group called the Armed Forces Institute. They began to bring in all kinds of books. And I got one that was called Give Yourself Background by F. Fraser Bond. And I read that book. But in addition, I began to read about the Anglo-American Caribbean Commission, which was a State Department thing with the British. And it was the first time I'd heard the name Ralph Bunche, and I began following him and got me interested in diplomacy. And I said, I'd love to be a diplomat one day. Well, after coming out, of course, and graduating, the State Department didn't give me much attention. I did rejoin the Marine Corps after being out about a year or so, and decided to join them. But the Marine Corps would not put us on active duty. It proposed having an all-black trucking company in Harlem. And I said, no, we want to join all of the outfits and not just stuck with a truck company. Anyway, the Marine Corps said they would go ahead with it. I protested it, and back came an order saying, henceforth, all organizations will be open without regard to race, creed, or color. And I thought a pariah because when I applied for a commission, I was already a senior at NYU. When they heard that I had opposed the Marine Corps, they walked out on me. And I was, of course, away from the Marine Corps until years later when two things happened. Number one, a young black captain at the Naval Academy was on his way home with his uncle, and his uncle was shot and killed by some racist young man. And the captain's wife was shot and hit and paralyzed for life. And it looked as if his career in the Marine Corps was over. But the commandant of the Marine Corps came down to the academy, put his hand on Stanley's shoulder and said, Stanley, the Marine Corps will look after you. Stanley went on to become both a PhD as well as a major in the Marine Corps. Now that brought me back, but one other thing happened. By this time, I had become U.S. ambassador, and two of my associates had been assassinated. And so I asked for Marine security guards, and I was able to get them. And again, I received a nice long letter from the commandant telling me he was so proud of me for getting Marine security guards there. And when these men came in and they said, Mr. Ambassador, we want you to know we're prepared to give our lives to save yours. I was back in the Marine Corps that day. And I've been back ever since, yes.
I love that, and when I read that, I said that is only something a Marine would do and would say, because they had no Marine security guards at that point, right? And
that's right. In the British tradition, they didn't need them. They didn't carry guns or anything like that. And suddenly things began to change, and these men came in and they let it be known that that was their job to look after me. Yeah.
And I love it because when I was reading for the audience here, I think you might have said something to the effect of, now it looks a little more squared away. It looks a little more clean, and that got you a lot of controversy for that. I said that is amazing. Someone that can go in there, get it squared away, and then make sure the mission is done. I
Yeah.
mean, what more of an amazing. But I do want to take a step back. So, you were part of also. You got involved in banking and finance as well, right? I think
Yeah. Yes.
in
Yes.
that role. Why did you decide to get involved with banking and finance? Was that something that you saw as an opportunity? Because let me tell you, Ambassador, I think that's a very important industry to be a part of, especially financial literacy.
Here's what it was. Having this business of gentleman and a scholar, then I became interested in diplomacy. When I started looking at all of the courses at NYU, I was looking for something that would kind of fit me for diplomacy. And I saw international banking and foreign exchange. That's what got me interested in banking, because of the international aspects. And that's what I sort of specialize in. Not only that, but also in international economics and anything that revolved around philosophy, logic, ethics, history, civilization, those kind of things. And so banking and finance seem to be a special place because it has a certain amount of standing in the community. And so that's pretty much what I ended into it. But I found that from that point on, because of my, for lack of better words, demeanor and my knowledge of money, I was always welcomed as treasurer or the person to take care of people's money. Yeah.
Wow. And by the way, I had on a couple months ago the CEO for the African American Alliance of Community Development Financial Institutions, and that is an amazing organization. He's also he's a Vietnam veteran.
What organizations is this?
It was the African American Alliance of CDFI CEOs. His name is Mr. Linwood Long, and it was I've learned more about the finance world because I understand how important community investment is, and it's great for someone like yourself with diplomacy and leadership that took a stand or at least got involved in that, because economics plays a really important role on the welfare of communities, right, and workforce development and community development and investments, and I'm so glad that you had that background. So that was a great compliment for you, but then you got into diplomacy, which and it's interesting because I think a lot of us that get out of the service have realized how important diplomacy is before we engage in war. And so I'm curious why you got into diplomacy. Was there, I know you said you read a book, but was there like a somebody that also you met where or something happened to you like growing up where you realized diplomacy is really important because it can prevent conflicts, and it can lead to better relationships and nation building or community building?
Yeah, Jeff, let me weave you through it. I was able to get into banking, but in this case, the banking was very confining. Whenever something major was happening, I could not get away from it because the bank was a new bank and it was growing, but it took up an awful lot of time and I was not happy with it. There came a time when I was invited to join the American Baptist Home Mission Society, and they had installations in a number of places: Puerto Rico, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Alaska, Hawaii, throughout the states, and in Central America. This was sort of open for me because I was in charge of all of the property, and I became a commissioned missionary as well with them. Okay, but then we took over 9 social-oriented housing developments throughout the country, and that made me sort of an expert because I started going to England to study what they were doing in housing. And from that point on, I attracted the attention of government. We were having different meetings in government to talk about new standards in housing, new types of housing, and so forth. And I began to get invitations to join the government, but I wasn't particularly interested at that time. But then finally, something happened that made me sort of lean towards it, and I joined it in research and technology. And this meant that I had to handle the foreign research and foreign technologies and went overseas. And luckily, one day someone came past from Duke University to invite me to speak down there. And I told him that I'd be in Europe. And the person with worked for U.S. Information Service said, well, would you be able to do some speeches for us, programs for us? And I said, oh, of course, yes. Well, when I went to these embassies and told them to use me, that I was there to help them and not to worry about.
I think we were talking about diplomacy and why I think diplomacy is a very important skill to have to navigate around relationships, conflicts, and mediate. And I believe I asked you the question is, why did you get into diplomacy after the banking and finance? And is there a particular story? Is there somebody that is there a memorable moment where you felt like you wanted to get into this to be able to help people? Because I feel like diplomacy is about helping people, Ambassador.
Yes, Jeff, the thing that caught me was to read about Ralph Bunche. At that time, I didn't know very much about State Department, but when I read about him and his work with what was then called the Anglo-American Caribbean Commission, I did not know how this worked, but here's what happened. The British, as you know, were well tied up. As a matter of fact, it looked as if the British government was going to fall. And so for all of these islands over here, and these were big islands, and I'm talking about places like Guyana in South America, which is not an island. You're talking about Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, and others. And the British couldn't manage them. And so they worked out a deal with the State Department whereby the U.S. would manage those islands. And Ralph Bunche was assigned as the officer to do it. And that's what got me interested in the Anglo-American Caribbean Commission. I had never heard of it before until years later, by the way, when I was reading about Colonel Woods. Because he was a specialist in embarkation and debarkation, was sent to the North Atlantic because there was a possibility that the British government might fall and they might have to evacuate both the government and the royal family. And that's what got me interested in it. And then I realized why there was an Anglo-American Caribbean Commission. The British were not in position at all to manage or to protect Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, and those other islands over here, Bahamas, the Bermuda, and so forth. So the United States would guard those islands for the British.
Oh,
And
I
that's what got
see.
me interested in diplomacy. That's what got me interested in diplomacy. As you know, Ralph Bunche, because he was connected with so many islands, was then taken over to help form the United Nations in San Francisco. I watched that forming also. And with that, then he came to New York. And a member of my church, John D. Rockefeller Jr., bought the land and gave it to the United Nations as its new site. So being a staunch member of that church, the Riverside Church in New York, I became ever closer and closer to diplomacy because I was following Ralph Bunche, who used to end up, by the way, used to sit in my pew at this church.
Oh, wow.
I was an usher. So, but then because that church is international and well known throughout the world, I got to meet so many people who were world famous, people like Albert Schweitzer, some, not to mention Dr. King and others and so forth. And so Utant, the first Asian Secretary of Secretary General of the United Nations. So I was very much involved with things long before I went into diplomacy. And when I started going overseas, I would meet ambassadors that I had been reading about years before, and I would talk about them and their careers and what they had been doing and so forth. And they were very fascinated with how in the world I'm an amateur, but I knew so much about them. Yeah.
And, and and I think you hit the key word here is books. Like your level of knowledge, you are a
Yes,
very
yes. I
intelligent
read the life
person.
of Cordell Hull, who was Secretary of State under President Roosevelt. Then I began to read others. And interestingly, because of my work, I began to meet some of the same people who were involved in diplomacy, but outside of diplomacy. For example, the Dulles family were members of my church. Simpson had been a man of my church. Simpson, the Secretary of War during World War II, was a member of my church, and so I I was getting so much of it through osmosis, you might say.
So you hit on another very important. I want people to understand that is your access to a network.
Yes,
One thing we always tell veterans is be a part of a network
yes,
because your network is your net worth, right?
and
And
I
I
and I say keep and make notes, keep a diary because today's minor occurrence becomes tomorrow's historic event.
oh
So
wow,
make
wow.
note. You never know when something that you do today is going to pop up tomorrow, and it'll
Well,
help.
I'm taking notes for you with what you're telling me right now, sir. So I am definitely following your orders and
Yes.
your wisdom. So so in your diplomacy, were there any times where you felt that this was your calling? This was, what God had put you on this earth for. Was there any moments where you had mediated between two rival groups, or was there, anything where you felt like, this is what God called me to do, which is to mediate or be a diplomat?
Yes. When I left the Marine Corps in active duty, I became active in community affairs, and at one time I was even admitted to a seminary to study for religion. But for some reason, I didn't think that religion was not the field that I wanted to be in, but I still wanted to do a public service. And so I began being in community affairs and community work, and that just continued to lead to try to do I mentioned that I became a commissioned missionary, which, by the way, had a big benefit because as a commissioned missionary at that time, the tax code allowed me to deduct 40% of my income in making my tax report. So that was something. It changed ultimately, but and when I started going out to embassies, I was not going in as a stranger. I almost went in as a friend who knew what was going on. I knew the history of the embassies. I knew the people. And I knew something about them and how they worked. So I was in an organization, not de facto, but I mean not de jure, but de facto, and they began to see me as part of them. And I would even be asked, "What part of the world would you like to go to this time? Would you like to go to Asia, or to Africa, or to Europe? You have your choice." Now, can you imagine that? I've done maybe upwards of 170 countries, and that's because I was allowed to go to any one country that I wanted to do programs. In addition, I was meeting with the OECD in Paris, and I was both vice chair and later on chairman of it. 24 nations, but I had access to all of these nations. And later, in the second part of my career as a diplomat, when I represented the president with all of these different agreements, I could go to these countries representing the president, but the State Department would finance it. And although my field was housing, I did not have to call on the Department of Housing and Urban Development to pay for my travels or my expenses. And so it was something that I gained both a lot of knowledge, a lot of acquaintances and friends and so forth. And it just expanded my knowledge, but also, I guess, my philosophy and my appreciation of people of the world. I no longer see people of the world as strangers, but sometimes a little bit different from our culture, or our food, or our clothing, and whatever over here. And so, whenever I hear anything happen in any part of the world, I'm curious about it. But that's why I say to the youngsters, take notes, because later on you find yourself hearing something about that particular country or about a given person. Some of the people whom I met as acquaintances went on to become prime minister of their countries or chief ministers of their countries and so forth. And that's because with my notes, I remembered our interaction and so forth. And I became friends, especially in the Scandinavian countries, where today there are men that you're talking to on the telephone, and the next day they're prime ministers of their country. I even had a nice long conversation with Queen Elizabeth one day, and we talked at length until she said, "I'd better go. These people are looking at us." Yeah, but
That is also what a diplomat and a politician does, right? To talk and communicate and be welcoming. Uh, is there a particular moment where, what did you learn about yourself in all these dealings? What did you, because to me, what you described is somebody that was ready to meet the moment, right? To walk in and have these conversations with boldness
yeah,
and confidence.
yes, Jeff, I've often thought about it privately. I like to think I have what's called a non-threatening personality. People don't get angry at me, and I don't do anything to make them feel angry at me. I always, my wife has teased me about I never have a bad word to say about anybody. And secondly, I can talk about a person for ages, and she may be concerned as to what is that person's color, but she won't know it just by listening to me talk, because the person's color is less important than the person's outlook, friendship, education, maybe economics, and so history and so forth. And so I'm just appreciative of all people, because so many people have been kind to me, and I've had to do as much as I can to reciprocate that kindness in other people throughout the world. I've done things without even thinking about them or something. And some my some people wonder, why do you do all of these things? But the fact is, in one way or another, people have touched my life and made my life a happy one and so forth. And so I'm obligated to do all I can to help other people.
I love that. And as we get to ready to wrap this up, Ambassador, you lived a life that anyone would love. You served your country. You were part of history. You are history. You have became a diplomat. Is there anything else that you want to look back on in your life and say, I put
Yeah,
that on the
I'll
table?
tell you this. One day I was headed to California by way of Chicago, and the airport from where I worked in Washington, D.C., was just about 15 minutes away. All I had to do was go down 2 blocks, make a right turn, and I'd be on the highway. And next thing, I'd be at the airport. On this particular day, instead of making a turn, I made a left turn, and I couldn't get off the highway. And so I missed the plane. And that plane crashed in Chicago, killing everybody on board. Well, people said to me, "You were blessed." And I said, "No, I wasn't blessed. It was a random occurrence." And they said, "Well, you were blessed. Your life was saved." And I said, "Well, I think of the 130 so people who were on that plane. They were not evil people or bad people. It's a random occurrence, and I wouldn't blame God for taking their lives. or nor would I give credit for saving my life. All I know is it was a random occurrence in which I came out still with work to do. And so part of my duty in life as I see it is to do everything to show my appreciation for still being here. I could have been gone during my 80s or something, or my 60s, but I'm blessed in the sense of being able to appreciate what I have. I've never ever had to worry about where my next dollar was coming from, uh, having enough in my pocket of my food or anything like that. And so I've been one of those unusual people on the face of this earth. I've met the top people in the world, Presidents Nixon, Ford, Bush, just so many wonderful people, and I served under 7 presidents and so forth. So it it's it's something that it's a random occurrence, but it's a good one that I'm blessed with in that sense.
Ambassador, thank you. Thank you again for coming on today. Any final thoughts or comments?
Just to be grateful to you inviting me to share these thoughts and to be called upon. After all, old guys like me are supposed to be laying around maybe with a glass of milk and a cookie or something. and
Hey,
just get in the
I like
corner
it.
and keep quiet.
Hey, no. We need more people like yourself, Ambassador, more in this time and age. And I'm glad that you took the time to be able to do that. And please, ladies and gentlemen, once again, next month, the Montford Marines are going to be having their event, and we're going to be putting more information out after this recording today. So it's gonna be a historical event, and you guys are not going to want to miss it. So, Ambassador, thank you again for coming on today on TVC. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to we doing this again next time.
Thank you, Jeff, and God bless you and all of your listeners, your watch and your viewers. Yeah.
God bless you, sir.
All right.